Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Why the secrecy and disinformation around the subject of UFOs? Does the government have actual evidence of alien visitation? What was Project Blue Book?
Greetings and welcome to the 859th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. I am Ben, and those high-flying questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and Dad, Paul. And today we bring you a guest who should have been on here a long time ago, and we welcome your calls today. The number is 401-766-1240. That's from anywhere. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com. Or you can contact us via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram for those who are vocally shy.
Now, all that being said, he should have been on a long time ago, and we're not sure he's going to be on today because we are not able to contact him yet. So we're going to hope for the best, and I will introduce him. Dr. Kevin D. Randall is a preeminent UFO researcher, particularly when it comes to the reported crash of a UFO near Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. A veteran of the U.S. Army and Air Force, where he did intelligence work. He served in Vietnam and also in Iraq. Kevin holds an undergraduate degree in journalism from the University of Iowa, a master's degree and Ph.D. in psychology from California Coast University, and a second master's degree in military studies from the American Military University. He retired from the military in 2009 as a National Guard lieutenant colonel. Kevin is a best-selling author of over 100 books, including the Best of Project Blue Book, which was supposed to be the subject of our discussion today. That was just released in March. His website, Kevin Randall, or it's Randall, R-E-N-D-L-E, .blogspot.com. And as I say, we have not been able to contact him, and we will. We hope he's okay. We will attempt to do so during the show. But in the meantime, we will do what we do in these cases, and that's have Plan B, which is an impromptu open line show. We have emails going back years, and we have all sorts of Facebook contacts as well that we didn't get to last week during our open line show last week. So I guess we'll do a kind of back-to-back shows here in that vein. So we have one here from we didn't get to from Mark in Lincoln, Rhode Island, right in our listening area.
Indeed. Really just a stone's throw away from the studio, really.
Let's not talk about stones.
That's fair. Yeah. So Mark writes to us, I just listened to your great show from December with Dr. David Hart. If I heard the show live, I would have called in with this question, but maybe you can answer it. If demons or parasites can be saved by God, wouldn't they have to die first? If they are fallen angels, how can angels die?
Well, that's a good question. That gets into our show from 2 weeks ago on, 3 weeks ago on eternal life. Now, I was very disappointed, Ben, that you weren't able to be here. Now, we got bumped 3 hours ahead of our usual, behind our usual time because of professional sports coverage here on WOON, and it was nobody's fault. But Ben had other arrangements.
Playoffs.
No, it's not your fault. You couldn't make it. It was
unfortunately.
The playoffs. We couldn't the hockey NHL playoffs, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I hate doing this, but I took the script and I did it myself. I hate droning on for an hour without any company. But anyway, we had some. I didn't even get through the whole script. A lot of people are interested in the subject of eternal life, of course, and the question did come up: do you have to die first? Now, it would seem obvious to the casual observer that you have to die in order to go to heaven or hell or whatever, however you define an afterlife or eternal life. I don't think that's true, because if you look at the theology of not just the Christians but a number of others. There is, and I pointed that out on this show, that you don't have a lot of distinction between this life and other lives. And I was thinking particularly of the ancient faiths, like those of the Aborigines in Australia, the traditions like the Andaman and Nicobar Islanders of the Indian Ocean area that go back literally tens of thousands of years of unbroken tradition. And their very DNA says that they are the most ancient peoples in the world, except for some of the Africans. So the tradition there is that you just don't have this stark contrast between life, dying in material world, and then some sort of spiritual life after that. That is the current Western belief, pretty much. And so the question is, wouldn't it... Okay, but let's go back a little bit. Dr. David Bentley Hart, we had a great show with him. It is the second most popular show we have ever run in 12 years, more than 12 years on the air. And he is an Eastern Orthodox theologian who was on the show to talk about whether the devil would be saved. Funny thing, but there was an ancient argument in the ancient Christian church about whether God being completely just and completely merciful, that everything and everyone would eventually be saved. The symmetry of not doing that for eternity would not be good. The idea of eternal damnation, particularly of people who are finite and for finite crimes, it just doesn't set right with a lot of people's idea of justice. Okay, I know that there's a lot of the Christian groups just will have fire coming out of their ears because of what I've said, but I'm sorry. I'm not comfortable with the idea of eternal damnation anyway. And there was a tradition in the ancient church that it really was never settled in the East about whether everybody will eventually be saved. So hence the question from Mark in Lincoln about whether wouldn't demons, so-called, have to die first. Well, I hope I've answered that no. First of all, our idea of demons is that of parasites and living creatures. And sure, as much as death is possible in the multiverse, where you have all kinds of versions of yourself, if the physics is interpreted that way, and if we are correct in our own theories and methods, that the answer would be no. You don't. Eternal life can begin here and now, and really, whether you want it or not, you've got it. In a sense that, again, there are so many different versions of yourself. Again, if this thinking is correct. Ben, you seem like you want to say something.
I'm forming the thoughts in my head to make a quick, not subversion, move the argument in a different angle to look at.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I think the major question here is sort of how the question is worded in the first place. There's sort of this idea of being saved, and I think that saved isn't the right word. Okay. I don't think that that's a good enough word to describe it, because that I think it sort of implies moving of something to somewhere else, or to rescue from a danger, which I guess the danger in this case would sort of be the natural condition, or the condition of the world, as it were. And essentially, I think that the wording of can they be saved, I think it's incorrect. I think that's not the right way to say it. There's this idea of sort of, and it's reflected in different in other sort of spiritualities too, which is a sort of Taoism kind of comes to mind, which is sort of the reuniting of sort of the, like, let me just put this in a way, reuniting of the self with the natural, right? So, like, the Taoist sort of argument is that as man separated themselves from nature, everything kind of fell apart, and that was kind of like it. Or as man separated themselves from heaven, as it were, or the way, it sort of fell apart, and life became complex and confusing and hard, and that, so you sort of had two different ideas of what happened in ancient China, which would be Confucianism or Taoism, which were the two sort of major philosophies at the time. Confucianism was more about building very specific rituals to reunite one with heaven, whereas Taoism was about, instead of doing complex rituals, just reuniting yourself to nature, in a sense, or heaven through a simple life. You'll see where I'm going with this. The idea of salvation is a very strange one, and I think it's the wrong word to use, because the English language is just completely butchered anything that has to do with any philosophy or theology, because in English, the words are so fickle, and it doesn't really imply sort of the depth. For example, right? So, like the word for mercy in sort of in English, translated in Greek, was eleison, correct?
Yes.
Which essentially means olive oil, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
And the idea was that olive oil was a healing agent, and that it meant healing. Now you can't derive that from just saying, oh yeah, let's show mercy on this guy, because it's like, it implies some sort of justification, some sort of judgment, etc. Whereas, in other languages, the words that we use, they don't display the depth. So where I'm going with this is in a lot of other sort of spiritualities, there's sort of not just a reuniting of the self, as it were, to sort of the divine or the world. It's reuniting of everything. That everything is then turned towards the divine.
That's the unity with a capital U that we talk about in our books.
Right. That everything in this case would be reunited with God. Right? So that would include all of creation, because it's meant to sort of, sanctify stuff. And everything under the sun, basically, is meant to be reoriented. So saving is just not, I don't think it's good enough. I don't think that that's a good enough way to describe it. It's a reorienting of all of creation to where it's supposed to be.
And it denies the island theory, which we're always talking about on the show, that it's all about us, everything we are is contained within our bodies, and that's simply not true in the traditions of most people, most of the ancient cultures especially. There is, as Ben said, that this unity which must be restored. So I get what you're saying.
Right. That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So it's not like, they're individually, kind of like, oh, well, they have to die first. It's like, well, that's not really the point. The point is not death, because, that's kind of a non that doesn't make any sense. Because if creation is life, right? If the divine is life, that doesn't make any sense. So in living in eternal life, which is pursuing life in all of its facets, whether it's regrowing relationships with other people, or regrowing relationships with, anything you've kind of formed bonds with, whether it's pets, anything that kind of exists in a way. It's this sort of reorienting of yourself to creation.
Yeah. Well, so folks, feel free to call in today. We're having an impromptu open line show, 401-52, that's my 401-766-1240. Do not call my personal cell phone. That's a number here, WOON 1240 AM and FM is 401-766-1240. So we have a question, of course, from Peter in Bogota, our very, very faithful listener and good questioner.
Is this for us or for
no, this was a question for Colonel Randall, Dr. Randall. So we're going to, we're still unable to contact him, so we'll just continue doing this, and hopefully he's okay, and we'll, if we can't get him on, we'll reschedule him. But we'll save this question for when we do have Dr. Randall on the show. So who's next, Ben?
Yes. So we have Michelle from Austin, Texas. I'm hearing a lot of people say that this coronavirus is being spread in chemtrails. Have you heard anything like that? What do you guys think? Who would be doing this and what for?
Well, I mean, I have heard that. We don't necessarily believe it because I have a little bit of experience in the air, and we know some pilots as well, who one of whom is a reporter for the show from Europe, and he's a commercial airline pilot, and none of them believes any of that. They said, chemtrails are well, first of all, they said they're not chemtrails, they're condensation trails. Water vapor comes out. And what has made a lot of people nervous is that at times, if the atmospheric conditions are correct, these condensation trails will spread out and will literally form clouds. But that is nothing to do with spreading chemicals. Now, I'm not saying it's not happening. I think that there's plenty around today to be conspiratorial about it, but I don't think that's...
I feel like there'd be better ways to spread it, too.
Yeah, like
honestly.
what?
I don't know, water supplies, the basic things people use every day.
Well, water supplies, because this really, I never forgot the nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare training we had in the military. But you would need unless there's some new toxins that don't need this factor, but you'd have to put tremendous, barrels and barrels and barrels and barrels of stuff into a public water supply in order to contaminate enough of it to have any effect. Now, again, that may have changed, and I hope it did not. But they're pretty well watched, the public water supplies, and people will notice if you're going to do that kind of thing. So, personally, I don't think there's anything to the chemtrail thing. I mean, there may be, but I don't know of any evidence for it.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't really think so either, honestly. I mean, I think it's easy to kind of get spooked by something that we know very little about. But another thing we have to keep in mind is that viruses inherently are constantly changing, and so there's bound to be something that we will not have immunity to. It's happened many times in human history.
Oh, yeah.
The bubonic plague is a perfect example because no one had immunity to it. That's just how it is. There's when the sort of explorers from Europe came over to the current continental Americas. They brought with them a bunch of diseases that the Native Americans were not immune to. Although the question would be, why didn't the Europeans get diseases from them? But that's a different sort of thing. But,
yeah, I've always wondered that too.
Yeah,
I mean, it works both ways, you would think.
Yeah, maybe they ate a lot of garlic. Who knows?
Yes, that's sort of a family joke.
Yeah. Well, so I guess the argument would just basically be, at some point, somewhere along the line, there would be something we all wouldn't have immunity to.
Well, there is another side to that question, whether the questioner intended it or not. There is plenty of evidence this is called the panspermia theory of Sir Fred Hoyle, the great British astronomer, astrophysicist, who is no longer with us, but I kind of grew up with him reading his books. The panspermia theory is that life, including diseases, bacteria, will be spread across the galaxy by what we think of as gas clouds, or by meteors landing on Earth that may have microbes on them. And it's been found that they do. Now whether it's enough to spread anything or to create biological mutations is another thing. But he and his team in the 1950s and 60s traced back through the periods of the Earth where there were explosions of new forms of life, such as the Precambrian extinction, and all of a sudden you have all this new life. His conclusion was that either a large meteor hit the Earth and and created the extinction, but at the same time spread this new sort of genome or something that went out, and all these new species resulted. A rather elegant way to replace life on a planet, I guess. There
was an astronomy professor I had in college who. He was kind of a funny guy. He sounded like Ray Romano. He made a really funny point once, that he was like, if an astronomer doesn't know what it is, he was like, 9 times out of 10 they'll say a collision did it.
Yeah. Well, science does that, particularly physics. They'll come up with a theory to plug a hole and then
until
test
it doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, and then sometimes it does work. So there's your answer.
I guess that's kind of how science works.
Yeah. At least the physical sciences, anyway. So in any case, that's just one. So I'm not suggesting that the coronavirus came on a meteor, because it looks pretty clear that it came out of a lab in Wuhan. But things have happened. As strange new diseases have cropped up. Sort of without any known origin. And it could very well have been not only from meteors, but the Earth moving through what Fred Hoyle would refer to, we would call them gas clouds. But he thinks that he thought they were full of microbes. I mean, entirely. That's how life spreads around the galaxy.
Yeah.
Or maybe the whole universe. I don't know. So that's just one aspect of that possible answer to the that concept proposed in the question. So who's next?
Tammy, who coincidentally we actually started answering this question, and Tammy from Question Mark writes to us. I'm an avid listener, and I've heard you guys mention several things a number of times, and one of these ideas is that people who have contact with aliens could be in real danger from alien germs that they do not have immunity to. You also talk about other worlds that are right next to ours and interact, of course, through paranormal events. Putting these two ideas together, do you think that this virus could be alien in origin, or could it have come across from an alternate world? Or, as you guys say, maybe both?
Well, boy, we're sure a lot of medical questions today. Well, again, I think this particular virus, it seems pretty clear it came out of that lab, and so that's one thing. But again, many other possibilities are raised in this question. For example, the very legitimate concern of meeting an alien race and being infected by something you don't have immunity to. That's the whole theme of War of the Worlds. H.G. Wells' novel, and that was made into, as far as I know, 3 different films.
Yes, and don't forget about the infamous radio play.
And oh, good grief, yeah, the radio play. But the whole theme was at the end, the Earth was saved by these people from space who had the technology to get here, through space, but were too klutzy to realize that they might not be immune to Earth viruses, that sort of thing. So, I mean, it's a legitimate concern. I remember when the first, I believe it was the first 3 moon missions, 1969 through 1971, there was the Lunar Receiving Laboratory that NASA set up, and as soon as they arrived from the moon, they were isolated, the 3 astronauts, because it was believed the moon, of course, has no life, and there's still no evidence of life that I'm aware. There is evidence of water here and there, but not, as far as I know, any life so far that we would describe it. They were taking absolutely no chances that any kind of alien virus could be released on Earth. So, but then after nobody got sick after 3 missions, 9 astronauts, they decided they didn't really need to do that anymore. And it seemed that everything worked out. So they were just being careful. But there was an awareness of this. As far as coming in, and I've often wondered in our contacts with multiple worlds, that could viruses get in that way? And sure. But I think you have to realize that these worlds, at least in our experience, are not separated from one another totally. They constantly interact. And mostly they're within our world family, which means that the laws of physics are similar. And, you may put your keys down on the counter, and then they'll be at the other end of the counter, and you turn around again. There are little glitches like that. But you're not going to have the furniture flying around the living room from a poltergeist or from the conditions created by worlds that have different laws of physics intersecting. So at least in most cases. And then when we do have things like that happen, we say, aha, it's paranormal, or there's a ghost or a demon or something like that. That's the only way we have to explain it. But with all this interaction, exchange of energy, exchange of matter even, there could very well be exchanges of bacteria and viruses and things that may or may not be very pleasant. So, I think that's very possible. But it's all part of the natural order. I mean, I think we intersect with thousands of parallel worlds every day, maybe millions.
Well, there's a really interesting phenomena that comes to mind. Not necessarily, diseases or anything coming through, but a lot of, I don't want to say a lot. There's a number of UFO contactees that have issues with radiation.
Yeah, that's true.
Cancer, radiation poisoning, things like that. And it's interesting that you don't see any sort of other illnesses pop up, but you do see stuff along those lines.
You're right.
Which is fascinating, and I'd want to know why. I feel like I've asked the question and I don't remember the answer to it.
Yeah.
But I do remember that being kind of an issue.
Next time we have one of the UFO headliners on the show, that's a good question to ask.
Yeah,
especially Kathy Martin. I mean,
I think I might might have asked Kathy. It was a while ago, but I don't recall what the answer was.
Well, she deals with lots of experiencers and people who think they've been abducted, and probably have.
That's true.
So that would be something to keep in mind for that.
Indeed.
Okay. Well, we are coming on to our mid-show break here, and you're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley, doing impromptu open lines today, so stick with us.
The night is alive. Join us and take a walk on the weird side when you tune in to The Kingdom of Nye, hosted by Heather Wade, the finest in late night talk. Listen live free weeknights starting at 9 p.m. Pacific Time at thekingdomofnye.com, talkstreamlive.com, and the Paranormal Radio app. Wanna take a ride?
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley.
You okay?
Local and live on 90. I'm trying to think of the slogan. I love that slogan. Local and live on 99.5. Anyway, we have been unable to contact our guest today, Kevin D. Randall. That's very unfortunate. We had a great show planned, but we'll get him back, I'm sure. Something just went wrong with the communications. So we are
it's
doing
happened before.
It has happened before. We're doing impromptu open lines today, then, because we have piles and piles of messages and emails from people.
And all sorts of stuff.
So, Ben, if you would take us to our next question.
Sure thing. Tippy writes to us from Bangor, Wales, or if you're from Maine, Bangor. My house is haunted, and we are being told to stay indoors, or at least to go no farther than our own gardens. I inherited the house from my parents, so I own it. I grew up here, but I never liked it. I listened to your show and read your books, so I know your ideas, which I think make a good deal of sense. Thank you. So I do not think these are parasites, or not yet. They are what you might call time slips in grayish forms moving around. This happens 2 or 3 times a week. I do not really feel threatened, but I do not like being watched. It's fair. I know I can't do this alone. It's like being in a paranormal lockdown. Do you have any advice for people in my situation?
Well, this has come up on the show before, particularly during the I think that was probably written during the period of the lockdowns. Now, the UK is kind of in a touch-and-go situation with the virus as far as I've heard. We have relatives over there, and we hear news. They have had some more outbreaks, and there's I don't want to say it because I'm not too sure. We have a lot of listeners in the UK. If they want to let us know, that would be fine. But it's a kind of a problem if you're locked down. You can't leave your house or at least your property, and you live in a quote-unquote haunted house. You know. What do you do? Hopefully now people are getting out more. It's not so much of a problem. But one of the problems we find in a lot of cases, particularly parasite cases, is that people are homebound, or they're very ill, or they have, for some reason or another, they just have, they're giving too much, they're stuck in the house and they're concentrating on the entity or the problem or whatever it happens to be, and of course that just makes it worse. So, Tippy, hopefully by now you have emerged from the cocoon through the easing of the COVID situation in Wales. However, I would just say keep it as positive as you can. It's a good thing we have all these ways to communicate. I mean, you can just imagine what would happen to society, never mind the economy, without all these different forms of communication, electronic communication, ability to work from home, this sort of thing.
That is true, yeah.
And so thank heaven for that. You can say what you want about the Internet, but I think it saved our bacon in this case. So if you are stuck, for whatever reason, in a house like that, where there is, in Tippy's case it doesn't seem to be very negative, but I would say just keep it as positive as you can. Communicate with people. Keep your mind off it, and keep your mind on good and positive things as much as you can. I know it's a difficult year to try and do that, but that's the answer, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty much all you can really do, you know?
Yeah.
But it is in your hands, and I think that's kind of the thing to kind of keep in mind, too, right? You know, you can't control the situation, but you can control how you respond to it.
That's very true. All right. Here's an oldie, but not moldy. I'm going through some of our piles and piles of emails that we never answered. And this is from...
if you think we're being hyperbolic, we're not. There is actually a stack of emails next to my phone.
I have, Ben, I have 12,000 emails that I have not read yet. That is no joke. I don't know whether they're all about this, but they're all. It's beyond belief.
I imagine how Santa feels.
Yes, I'll take solace in that. Anyway, this is from Bridget in Flushing, New York, from 2007. Good grief!
Wow. Hey, we're.
Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, 13 years really. Everything's okay.
Moving as fast as we can. People complain about the postal services.
Alrighty, here we go. All right, Mr. Eno. I don't know which one this goes to. We'll assume that it's you. To be quite frank, sir, I do not believe in ghosts. Fair enough. At least I don't think I did until this morning, when I woke up to an apparition so strong that I was positive that it was someone who had broken into my apartment. You live in New York City when you're more afraid of leaving the doors open than the supernatural. That's fair. Since I am admittedly a skeptic, first I want to do some research to determine whether it is a ghost or not, or simply a trick of my imagination. I would like to try and find out more about the ghost. I've already read your article that does not seem to recommend Ouija boards or seances, so I was wondering what you would suggest as a starting point to find out more. That is, well, hey, 13. I hope we're not too late to at least
on
begin.
A nursing home by now.
That's fair.
Well, all right. So sorry for the slight delay in answering the question. Well, you want to tackle that?
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing is, was it? I'm trying to remember the first sentence. Was it waking up to a ghost?
Waking up to a very, very vivid apparition.
Okay. So waking up to it, that's a very fascinating way to kind of start it off, which is, I would first say sleep paralysis, right? That would be kind of like a first thing to go to, which is, if sometimes that in between stage of awake and asleep, there are reports of phenomena. Or it could even be that you might have sleep paralysis, in which case, if you find yourself not being able to move, which there was no mention of that, so I can't really say one way or another. It is possible that images do sort of appear that could be a quote unquote ghost. That's kind of the first thing. It's interesting that it's first thing when you wake up, you see an apparition. I would have wanted to know, again, it's been 13 years. So keeping that in mind, was there any behavior upon the part of the apparition? Was it just standing there? Was it doing anything? Did it say anything? I wouldn't immediately assume that it was a quote-unquote ghost. I would wonder, if this is the first time this has ever happened, what were sort of the circumstances behind it? If there was no other sort of thing going on, beforehand, leading up into this point, and I would say it was probably a one-off kind of situation. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, one thing that we point out frequently is that when you do see these things, and if they are legitimately paranormal in a broad sense, you may be seeing people from a parallel intersect point who are living in the same space, again, in a parallel reality. And this is good physics from the viewpoint of many physicists, although they don't go as far as trying to explain ghosts with them, most of them anyway. So I think, why do you see them as a sort of foggy figures or glowing figures? Because that's what you would see through the veil, if you want to use that old term, of the plasma-charged membranes between parallel worlds. The membranes, that is a term from physics. One of the things to bear in mind, though, is that it works both ways. And they would see, if they can see you at all, if they're aware of you at all, they would see you in the same way. We've had cases where the entities, or the people on the other side, if you will, see us the same way and think we're ghosts. So it's again a misunderstanding of physics on both sides of the veil, if you will. If we're interpreting it correctly. So it may be what we refer to as a pass-through. You never saw it before, you'll never see it again. Or it could be the beginning of a problem. But again, our blanket solution to all these things is just keep it simple, keep it positive. All right? So,
when in doubt.
Yeah, and I do feel sorry for the folks in New York who live in small accommodations and, where it's stuck during the lockdowns and stuff, which have fortunately eased quite a bit since 2 months ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
yeah.
All right. One of the things here, we have a long series of questions here, really from Michelle, who was an avid listener and sends us a lot of great guest requests. Let's maybe take that one that's marked.
Yeah, sure thing.
And this is not from 2007. This is much more recent.
In my opinion, I've said this to David Polides and Nathaniel Giles. If something occurs in one human naturally, like that man and woman in your book, then it can certainly be manipulated and artificially induced across all humans with the right knowledge and appropriate technology. That was the marked off portion.
Yeah.
Please feel free to respond while I read the rest of this.
We're trying to get David Polides on the show. David Polides is an expert in, among other things, disappearances, strange disappearances. Something Shane Searway, our great colleague and frequent co-host on the show, has been researching as well. So I think that would be something that we would want to deal with, mysterious disappearances. Well, the question is, what sort of disappearances, what's the cause of these things? Now, they've been known throughout history. There have been recorded instances. Some are exaggerated, others are not, as far as we know. One of the ones that was exaggerated, there was a man was... Matter of fact, it came from an article by a journalist that said that I think it was the danger of crossing a field, or the perils of crossing a field. And it was a man in Tennessee who was a farmer, and a buggy pulled up, horse and buggy days, and they watched him come across the field and he disappeared in plain sight. Well, my information is that never happened. On the other hand, a group of joggers in the UK were jogging. This is about 15 years ago, and one of them tripped, fell, and never hit the ground. He just disappeared in front of all the others. I have that from several witnesses who were there. There are bizarre disappearances, such as pretty well recorded in the history of the Spanish colonial rule in South and Central America, that a Spanish soldier in Mexico City was walking his post at the central plaza of the city, and all of a sudden disappeared, and minutes later showed up in Manila in the Philippines. Now, the uniforms of the soldiers in the different colonies were different, and so he shows up in the Philippines, much to his own, he was completely flummoxed himself, and everybody and the authorities noticed that his uniform was wrong. And they thought he was just a nut job, because he said he was in Mexico City shortly before that, and what the heck is he doing in Manila? And he kind of freaked. And when all was said and done in those days, I mean, this is the 17th century, that it was found that he really was known as a soldier in Mexico City, and somehow he had been transported to the Philippines. Now, I have looked every which way from Sunday to disprove that, or at least to show that was a false report of some kind. And I can't find any evidence that it was not. There were official documents about that and all that sort of thing. So it does appear to, given the cold case nature of this, appear to have been at least a legitimate report, if not a legitimate incident. So these disappearances are something that we have to, I think, cover more fully. Shane has uncovered some, is researching particularly disappearances that occur in national parks in the past 10 years. They've been quite dramatic, some of them. And, of course, people would say at least some of them may be UFO abductions, alien abductions. I mean, that's possible. That the whole question is really open to more questions. So I mean, we weren't prepared to go through all Michelle's excellent prose.
That's why I'm trying to take a second and read it and take it all in.
Yeah, all right, sure.
Which I guess the argument is that some more savvy parasites could pull off a possession of the quote-unquote demon and manipulate us in that way. If something like this occurs in one human naturally, then it can certainly be manipulated and artificially induced across all humans.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. I see where she's going with this. I don't know. I think that I'm trying to find a way to put this, because I think she's trying to equate possession and technology together in order to sort of like mass control or mass. Not possess is sort of in quotations here, or sort of manipulate to get food out of us. I think that's sort of the direction she's trying to go in. And honestly, I don't think technology's needed for it. I don't think it's that sophisticated. I think it's honestly giving too much credit.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah.
I think that we have this sort of tendency as sort of a species to sort of give more credit to things that are sort of outside of ourselves than we should. I think it's almost like deifying parasites in a way by saying that they're super intelligent and do all this, when it's they are relatively intelligent.
No, some of them. Yeah.
Some. That's the caveat there. Some are relatively intelligent and some aren't, much like humans. Some are relatively intelligent and some, have different skills. That's just kind of how it is, And I don't think it's fair to assume that, that it's, everything's being manipulated. I think that's sort of playing into the hands of the proverbial hands of a parasite, right? The goal is, Evan even says it herself, it's manipulation, right?
Mm-hmm.
If your enemy if you think your enemy is stronger than they actually are, and they manipulate you into thinking that, they get the upper hand. And in this sort of instance, it's the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You trick people into thinking. They trick people into thinking they're stronger than they actually are, when in fact we give them all the power. That's kind of
right.
That's kind of the thing. And if there's one thing I've kind of learned over the years of dealing with this, and working with you, Father, and other greats in our field, it's that sometimes we give entirely too much credit to them.
Yes, I think that's well put.
And I think that it kind of takes power away from us, right? And it's that there are sort of these ideas that exist that maybe an advanced parasite could in fact possess stuff, but really it comes down to a tacit agreement between the possessee and the possessor, right? For one reason or another, which whether they're in circumstances where there's sort of like power to be gained on both sides, right? Say someone's like a victim of abuse, right? You're trying to grab some sort of power back for yourself. Then a tacit agreement is reached. It's sort of like a poisonous soup of sort of things kind of coming together. It happens. Decisions are made that aren't good. But in the end, there's responsibility on both sides. And I don't think it's fair to take away responsibility from oneself. Because if there's one thing that our society is good at, it's blaming other people.
Well, that's true.
And at some point, we have to kind of take a look at ourselves and look at our decisions and where we've come to and say, okay, what can I do better? And how can I take responsibility for things? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the person being possed's fault. Not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that there's an agreement that's reached there on both sides, and it's whether it's sort of conscious or not, it's there, and you shouldn't blame the parasite for all of it, because something somehow invited it in.
Yes.
And there's that invitation that's there.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it goes awry every time, and that's just kind of how it is. And, whether it was someone being ill-informed on their part, they're going through something, they didn't get the proper help, or they didn't know that they needed to get the proper help, And I think it's unfair to say the parasite's doing all of it, because, that takes power away from the person who's being affected by it too.
Yes.
And it's a complex issue, and I think it goes deeper than, they're trying to control us, which is, it could be entirely true. I could be really wrong. But at some point, we as a species, and especially us in the modern world, have to stop being victims. And we have to realize that, hey, we have our issues, and there are solutions we can make, and there are things that we can do. And just because, something awful happens to you doesn't mean you're powerless. Doesn't mean that, you have to be a victim all your life. At some point you have to stand up and say, hey, I matter too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same with this whole sort of thing. So I could be wrong. Maybe there is some sort of link between, parasites manipulating us and blah blah blah. I don't think that's true, and I don't think it's fair for us humans to sort of take power away from ourselves and say, well, we're just cattle, that's it. It's just, that dehumanizes us.
Yeah.
And that's just not, it's just not, it's just not true. Because we matter, we have value, and we have, sort of this power of ourselves, that we can move forward and be able to be ourselves. And so, possession's a thing. Whatever it is, however you define it, it's a thing, it's real. Whether you define it as demons, quote unquote, parasites, whatever, it's a thing, in some way, shape, or form. Whether we understand it or not, depending on, sort of the perspective we bring to it. The thing there's one common denominator between all of them, which is someone is affected. And there's a way that person is affected. And I think it's easy, as we've done before, to focus all on the phenomena and forget all about the person that's affected in it.
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of investigative teams do that. A lot of the feral ghost hunters, as we call it.
Well, it makes sense, right? We're trying to understand something that we don't understand. So naturally, we'll focus on the sort of the big thing, right? The sort of big sort of little explosion over here, but we don't focus on the people that it affects. And, I think a lot of it plays into, some very serious psychological trauma that, they never got help for, and they get taken advantage of by, whether it's people, parasites, whatever, and, it's sort of like you don't realize it's going on until it happens.
That's right.
And so, horrible things happen all the time, but I think the thing to realize is that we're not alone in this, and
that's very important.
We're all a community.
Yeah.
Whether if you believe you're alone and you're affected by stuff like this, you're not alone. Don't put it all on a parasite either. Because it's
devil
easy
made me do it.
Right. It's easy to there's responsibility there.
Yes.
And I think we as a society should really learn to take responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So just to finish up, I guess we have time for one more thought. We've been getting a lot of questions about flying humanoids lately, particularly as it relates to the alleged Mothman sightings in the Chicago area in the past few years. Now, flying humanoids are reported to be literally human-shaped objects, or people, literally, for all the way from the brujas of Mexico, the witches, supposedly, actually flying across open spaces on camera sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
All the way to objects that I think might be balloons. All right. It's very easy to mistake, especially if you have a bunch of black balloons or blue, whatever dark-colored balloons sort of floating, several hundred feet into the air to 1,000 feet where you can see them. Could very easily be mistaken for a flying humanoid. Now, there have been fewer reports, because we follow this stuff. There have been fewer reports of flying humanoids lately, even in the area of Monterrey, Mexico, where there was a lot of stuff going on, and they had gotten up into Arizona as well. But I wonder if it's not because of all the lockdowns and people just weren't going out as much and weren't in a position to see as many of them, whatever they may have been. But I think a lot of them are just balloons. Now, of course, this may not be the case in Chicago area where the supposed Mothman sightings have taken place. Now, Mothman, for those who don't know, was the name that the media gave to a very strange winged creature seen, particularly known for an outbreak of incidents in the Ohio Valley of the United States in the 1960s, mid-1960s. And supposedly that's still going on, but hundreds of people, very credible witnesses, trained observers saw this creature flying at great speed and doing this, that, and the other thing, and the press gave him the name Mothman. So people in Chicago have seen. I have a report of somebody. As a matter of fact, this is in our 2017 book, Behind the Paranormal 2, Bigfoot, Mothman, and Monsters You Never Heard Of. That there were reports in Chicago of two being seen at the same time, flying over the part of the lake where there was a marina and was very, very clearly visible in broad daylight. So whether these are large birds or whether they're things that people say, aha, it's Mothman, and there really is no such thing, we just don't know. But reports of that seem to have gotten a little, at least reports coming to us from our show reporters and listeners seem to have gotten a little bit less now. So I don't know if it's slowing down. Sometimes these things are seasonal. They really do pick up at certain times of the year. There were, particularly in November, I remember the Bridgeport poltergeist case that you're going to be hearing more about in the media, actually, because there's a lot of interest in it now. And I'm the only major living eyewitness, I think, who's left, except for a few retired police officers who are now in their 80s. That was November. Every November, for a while, it would pick up, and then of course our whole experience there was in November. So
I wonder why.
Well, that's for another show because we're running out of time.
I know, right? Yeah. Let's talk about that.
All right. So, but to be continued, and but we are monitoring the Mothman situation. So take us away, Ben.
Sure thing. So the 2020 Exeter UFO Festival on Labor Day weekend, which would be next weekend, has been canceled, unfortunately. But the 55th anniversary of the incident at Exeter will not go unsung on this show. On September 6th, the day we would have broadcast from the Exeter Town Hall with a panel of speakers for the 5th year in a row, we will do a rebroadcast of this year's panel show from there. On the panel, along with Kathleen Marden, Peter Robbins, Mac Maloney, Mike Stevens, and the Allagash UFO abductees, and many other luminaries in the field.
On September 7th, a week from tomorrow, Ben and I will be on the Travel Channel as part of the debut of The Devil's Road, the true story of Ed and Lorraine Warren, first in a new series of 2-hour documentaries, America's True Horror Stories. Anyway, I'm in it as someone who worked with the Warrens, and Ben is there to represent the new generation of researchers. That'll be the Travel Channel, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday, September 7th, 2020.
And then the Western UFO, the Western Connecticut UFO Conference, geez, I don't know why I keep leaving Connecticut out of there, will take place via Facebook Live on Saturday and Sunday, October 17th and 18th. There is a free annual event sponsored by the Danbury, Connecticut Public Library. Along with ourselves, speakers will include our own Shane Searway and Mark D'Antonio, along with Linda Zimmerman, Mike Panicello of the Connecticut MUFON, and more. On Sunday, we will simulcast our show from here on WOON with special guest Dr. Bill Burns of the UFO Hunters TV show. He's also a New York Times best-selling author and publisher of UFO Magazine.
Additionally, we have word that the New England Parafest will take place on April 10th and 11th, 2021 in Kittery, Maine. They're hoping for everything to be in person, and then we'll do a live broadcast of this show from there with a panel of speakers on Sunday the 11th, and more information on that will be forthcoming. So I guess we better move to our What's going on next week, Ben? I think we already said it.
Oh, well, we did, but hey, repetition. Next week, September 6th, in honor of the Exeter UFO Festival, we will replay the panel broadcast from last year's event featuring Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Mac Maloney, and many more great speakers that were there at the conference last year.
So we leave you today with a profound thought from, of all people, the American rock musician Jimi Hendrix. Knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. And we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.